いぞカメラ強いぞカメラ
Hello everyone, I am Zazubar, and welcome to Day 10 of Gamera Palooza. 1995's reboot to the Gamera franchise, Gamera Guardian of the Universe, directed by Shizuke Kaneko, was a huge financial and critical success in both the film's native Japan and in the international market, even going into a limited U.S. theatrical release in 1997, and making a little bit of money there, and also gaining some positive reviews from people who will otherwise scoff the kaiju genre, like film critic Roger Ebert, who gave the film 3 out of 4 stars. The film gained a lot of notoriety, and it's no shock that Dai put a sequel into production to be released the following year to capitalize on the success of the first movie. And with mostly the same production team, director Shizuke Kaneko returns, the film is still being distributed by Toho, and Kawatone returned to do the score, as well as the special effects, all being done by the same people, with the same suit actor reprising his role as Gamera. Which of course led to the 1996 sequel, Gamera 2, Advent of Legion, or is it Attack of Legion, or is it Gamera 2, the Supreme Guardian of the Universe? It's unclear. The movie has multiple titles. I prefer Gamera 2, Advent of Legion, because I think that sounds way cooler than Attack of Legion, but if you go on most websites, it's labeled as Attack of Legion, and I believe it's called Attack of Legion on my DVDs. But I'm going to keep referring to it as Advent of Legion because that's so much cooler. So 1996 Gamera 2 Advent of Legion is a strange case in the kaiju genre because it's a sequel to a movie that a lot of people love, and you would think people would immediately flock to it because it's a sequel to that movie. Actually, the kaiju fandom is kind of split on Gamera 2 Advent of Legion, mainly into 2 camps. The people who love it, saying that they actually enjoy it a little bit more than Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and see it as a worthy successor. And then there are other people who think that it's the weakest film in Shizuke Kaneko's Heisei Gamera trilogy, who think that it's not as good as Guardian and not as good as the follow-up film. And I actually come into the second party. I personally think that this is the weakest film in the Heisei Gamera trilogy. Now, let's put that in perspective. The Heisei Gamera trilogy is excellent and one of my favorite film trilogies. I don't think that Gamera 2 Advent of Legion is a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's still an exceptionally well-made, creative, entertaining monster movie. But the thing is, it's surrounded by 2 exceptional pieces of monster filmmaking. The incredible fresh reboot that was Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and the film coming later, which we'll get into tomorrow, but what many people consider to be the Dark Knight of kaiju movies with Gamera 3. So Gamera 2 just kind of sits there in the middle, and in that way, I think it's the weakest film. And mainly it's just because it's just kind of okay. Again, not a bad movie, but it just kind of does what it does, and does it okay. It does it fairly well. It doesn't really introduce anything that unique, with the exception of the monster that Gamera fights in the movie. But all in all, Advent of Legion just doesn't really have the fresh, original feel of Gamera Guardian of the Universe. It doesn't have that energetic sense of originality that film had, and honestly, it doesn't really have that much of an energy at all. It's kind of flat, and lacks a personality at points as a film. And as a Gamera movie, especially as a follow-up to my favorite Gamera movie, with my favorite characterization of Gamera, it also suffers from a really big problem of Gamera doesn't have enough focus in the story, and doesn't even get introduced into the story until way too late, not barely being mentioned until a half hour in. Which kind of brings Gamera 2 a little bit back to some of the problems that some of the Showa films had. to a much less of a degree, where those films sometimes felt like they were more focused on the monster that Gamera was fighting, and didn't balance Gamera himself with the monster he was fighting. That's definitely a problem that this film has. It doesn't have it as much because it does introduce some cool ideas later in the movie that are specific to Gamera, but it lacks a good sense of cohesion, kind of like Gamera vs. Barugan, and overall just lacks a good sense of balance. But we'll get into that in detail in a moment. Let's start, as always, with a brief plot synopsis. So basically what happens is a meteorite comes down in Japan near the city of Saburo, a year following the events of Gamera Guardian of the Universe, which prompts a military investigation and a scientific investigation, the military investigation being headed up by Colonel Watarase, and the scientific investigation being led up by Miss Hanami. The former being a colonel in the Japan Self-Defense Force, and the latter being a researcher at the local Sapporo Science Center. And we learn that the meteorite, after coming down, apparently vanished and seems to be moving throughout Japan. And following this, there are a couple of incidents where warehouses containing silicon-based objects, electronics, glass, beer, are attacked by some kind of by a group of strange insect-like creatures who seem to consume the glass and use it for some kind of purpose. We learn then that these creatures aren't just your average insects, that these creatures come from another planet, that the meteorite, much like some birds in nature, carried some of these creatures on them and they spread to Earth, where now they're spreading across the country of Japan. The city of Saburo becomes their first target, where they create a gigantic flower-looking thing that is referred to as the pod by the military, which is a big orange, fleshy-looking thing that erupts out of a building, and is apparently going to launch a seed that will spread the Legion further across Japan. And it'll do this by exploding, and the explosion will completely decimate the city of Saburo. Obviously, the military doesn't want this to happen, and try and take countermeasures to prevent this from happening. They want to try and blow it up, but they know obviously that's not going to work because that'll just make the problem worse, so they're kind of at a loss. Meanwhile, off the coast of Japan, a familiar-looking flying saucer-shaped object erupts from the Sea of Japan and flies towards Saburo. That object is, of course, Gamera, who crashes down in Saburo and engages the alien pod in a staring contest and then blows it the fuck up, stopping it from exploding. These smaller insect-like aliens then fly out and attack Gamera in retaliation for him destroying the pod and cover his entire body. He gets rid of them by turning into a flying saucer and flying away, splattering them and his own blood all over Saburo in a gory display. Gamera returns to the sea to heal his wounds. Meanwhile, the alien threat moves across Japan, and the military is still trying to figure out what to do, learning more about their life cycle and naming the aliens Legion because of their hive mind mentality, as they're very similar to ants or bees, as they're trying to increase the size of their colony and have a life cycle. Another pod opens up in the city of Sendai, where the Legion attempt to fire off another seed. Meanwhile, another aspect of the Legion is introduced, a Queen Legion who flies off and is seemingly killed by the military, but then pops up later in Sendai when Gamera shows back up to try and destroy the pod, and steps in to try and prevent Gamera from destroying the pod. This works as the Queen is trying to destroy a couple of helicopters trying to take off filled with civilians who are evacuating the city, and Gamera, of course, trying to protect them. The Queen fucks Gamera right the fuck up, and buries herself underground right before the explosion goes off, and allowing the helicopters to get away, but leaving Gamera caught in the explosion, as a giant nuclear explosion goes off in the middle of Sendai as the pod blows up and the seed spreads. The Queen and the Legion are moving across Japan still, as Gamera appears to be dead, and the city of Sendai is annihilated. And the military tries to take steps to stop Legion, setting up a defense line, but as always are unable to do anything to stop the monster, and pray that Gamera will return to life. He does, of course, as he absorbs some kind of energy out of the air, which seems to come from the fires burning around him by the refugees of the Sendai explosion, and Gamera returns to life and goes off to stop the Legion. Gamera gets into another fight with the Queen Legion, and is promptly getting his ass kicked as she is using both her own powers and also launching a whole host of smaller legions to attack Gamera. The military, while reluctant at first, decides to help Gamera combat the Legion because, of course, the Legion is going to annihilate the world if they don't. And through the combined efforts of the military and Gamera, they are able to stop the Legion, with Gamera using some kind of super omega fire attack to kill the Queen Legion, and the military firing up a nearby power station to attract all of the smaller legions, and then blowing them up with an airstrike. The Legion are defeated. Gamera returns to the sea, leaving an eerie question to be asked by Miss Hanami. Gamera seems to protect the Earth, not us. What if one day we started to destroy the Earth? What would Gamera do? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So, how about this story? As I said earlier, it feels a lot closer to the Showa series than the first Heisei Gamera film did, being more focused on the alien threat rather than it is on Gamera, and really doesn't feel the need to connect the alien threat to Gamera, except that, well, Gamera is the good guy and the aliens are trying to destroy his world. That's about the only connection that's present in the film. Overall, the story is just okay to me. It's an interesting alien invasion story, and what makes it interesting and unique is that it isn't really a conquest story about an intelligent race coming down to try and conquer the world. No, this is about an invasive species invading an alien environment and taking it over. You see this happen in the natural world, where a species will come from an alien environment and come into another ecosystem and destroy it. It's exactly what's going on here, and it's very, very interesting, and again, very, very unique. And the Allegiance life cycle is certainly interesting. The problem is that that's really all that's going on here, as my plot synopsis said. There's really no human drama whatsoever, which, as we talked about last time, isn't necessarily a problem. The humans just reacting to the monsters is fine, and in fact can sometimes lead to a film being better paced and having a more cohesive story. But the problem is that there just isn't enough going on in this story, and the film is way too long to have this little going on aside from just the alien invasion. It's focused way too much on the life cycle and on explaining the life cycle and on showing the life cycle of the Legion. And that leads it to drag quite a bit, because there's only too far you can take scientific exposition, which is something I love in monster movies, as I've said in this series, and it's done pretty well here. The explanations for the Legion is very, very interesting. But you can only take that so far, and it does lead to the story feeling a little flat at points, because it just doesn't feel like there's enough going on, and you kind of feel like you're watching an hour and a half of military dudes marching around and big flowers popping up, and that's about it. It just doesn't feel like enough happens in this movie. And part of the problem also, and we'll talk about more of this when we get into the characters, is that because there's not as much going on in the story, the characters just don't feel as personified. And their lack of personification leads to you not really wanting to follow them that much, and again, it just makes the story feel more empty. It just doesn't feel like enough goes on in this movie, especially since this is a sequel to another movie. It should have built more on the ideas that happened in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. And not that it doesn't. There are a couple of really good ideas that get carried over from Gamera Guardian of the Universe. I love all the references. The film has a fantastic sense of continuity. Tokyo Tower still being destroyed is fantastic. You can see it crumbled in the background. There's a couple of references to the fact that it seems like the world is falling apart because after the appearance of Gamera and Gauss, and now we're being invaded by aliens. This is an idea that will be expounded upon in Gamera 3. And I also like the idea of the military questioning whether or not we can trust Gamera. Regardless of the fact that he might help us fight an alien threat, he's still a big destructive monster, and it's hard to say whether or not he's worth keeping around, and whether or not he might one day become an enemy, which is what the final line suggests. We'll talk about that when we get into Gamera himself. Overall, my biggest problem with this movie is probably Gamera's place in the story himself. Because, again, he just kind of shows up to kill the monster, which was what was done with him in the original Showa series. And he doesn't get enough to do in the story aside from that. And it's made more of a problem because he has no place in the story until over a half hour in. He's only mentioned once before that, and it's just a throwaway line. It's just the moment where somebody's like, oh, it feels like the world's falling apart after the events of last year. And he doesn't truly have a place in the story until he shows up to kill the Legion. It's a big problem, and it leaves to the film just not feeling balanced enough. It just feels like it's kind of jagged. Like, it's focused so hard on the Legion for the first half hour, and then it slowly starts to introduce elements of carryover from Gamera Guardian of the Universe. I think that there should have been a story paralleling the alien invasion that worked off of the Gamera story from the last film, and then built into it as the two stories came together. Maybe you could have done something with Asagi in that way, who is in this movie, but her role is kinda pointless. She just kinda shows up to watch Gamera fight. She doesn't really do anything. And it's unclear whether or not she's still connected to him. She seems to might be, but it's unclear. And otherwise, she just seems there to be dramatic. And I think that her having a bigger place in the story before Gamera showed up to try and kill the Legion would have gone a long way to making the film feel more balanced as a monster fight movie. But overall, the story is just okay to me. It falls a bit flat, it's a bit slowly paced, and I just feel like the movie doesn't introduce enough ideas to truly warrant that runtime of an hour and 40 minutes. And it just feels a bit too empty for me. But it's still interesting as an alien invasion story. I think it works very well in that way. Overall, it's not bad, it just lacks an energy to me. It just feels too flat. And speaking of flat, let's get into the characters. I think they have a lot to do with why I think the story is so flat, because again, they just don't have enough of a personality. They're just kind of there. And because they don't have a lot of personality, we don't enjoy following them as much, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to care about what's happening to them with the alien invasion. No matter how interesting the life cycle of the Legion is, and no matter how interesting the alien invasion plot is, if we don't care about the characters who are dealing with this situation, it makes it 10 times harder for us to care as an audience. And I think that that's another major problem that this film has. Our primary leads, Miss Hanami and Miss Watarase, are very, very plain. They're your typical soldier dude and your typical kind of innocent, scientific, smart girl. And the actor and actress playing the two characters, they're kind of weak to me. They don't really inject a lot of personality into their line delivery, though the dialogue they're given isn't exactly great either. There's only one scene where I feel like they even kind of come to life, and that's when those two characters and Hanami's friend Obitsu go up to Hanami's room in her parents' house and are talking about the Legion, and they're talking about how awkward this must look to Hanami's parents with her coming up with these two big dudes and showing out up there. I like that scene. That's probably my favorite scene human-wise in the whole movie. But even then, it's awkwardly delivered and not really... It doesn't bring the characters enough to life to me. I could have gone for some more moments like that. Even though I don't necessarily like them as actors or even their characters, they have a little bit more romantic chemistry than, say, Nagamine and Yonemori in Guardian of the Universe, which I thought was strange. I actually like them more as a romantic couple than I did those characters, despite me liking those characters more than I like these characters. It's kind of weird. But all in all, they're very, very flat and very, very forgettable. My favorite character of the characters that are specific to this movie is definitely Obitsu. He's got an energy to him. He's got this nerdy energy to him that I love. He's a computer geek, and he's got this energy to him, and he's very, very fun to watch, and I wish he had more screen time. And he's definitely got a good place in the story. He's the one who executes the plan later in the movie to distract the Legion away from Gamera while Gamera is fighting the Queen. So he's got enough to do in the story. I just wish that he was more of the lead, because he's more entertaining to watch than Hanami and Watarase. So in terms of the characters that are new and introduced to this movie, they're just okay. They're not terrible. They're just very, very flat, and they lead to you just not caring enough about the main story. In regards to the returning characters from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, there are actually quite a few, though all of them have smaller roles. Let's start with Asagi, since she has the biggest role, but even then, her role is very small. She's skiing up north when Gamera and Legion begin fighting in Sendai, and that's where she has her first encounter with Miss Hanami. And all they basically do together is stare at Gamera dead and then stare at him while he fights the Legion. They don't really do anything. And Asagi herself in this movie, she comes off as kind of a crazy person, which is unfortunate. I really liked her in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. she just isn't as believable to me as a young teenage girl. She comes off as a little bit of a crazy person, constantly just spouting short dialogue about how Gamera is going to wake up and save us all, about how she just doesn't get any, in my opinion, anything real to say in terms of being a young teenage girl. She has one brief exchange with her father over the phone, and I think her father having a presence in this movie would have gone a long way to making me like her more. Maybe they couldn't get the actor back, that's certainly possible, but if they could have gotten him back, I wish they would have, because he was one of my favorite characters from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and I think he would have gone a long way to he went a long way to making Asagi feel more realistic, and I missed him here. I do really like the idea, though, of Asagi becoming famous as the girl who communicated with Gamera, being written about on websites online that are obsessed with Gamera, kind of like the Shrine of Gamera type of deal. I find that very, very interesting, and I think it's pretty funny. I wish they would have done more with that. Maybe she can't have a normal life now because she's constantly being hounded by the press or by weirdos looking for information about Gamera. I wish they would have done something with that, but no such luck. I just wish she had more to do in the story and had more dialogue, because as it stands, she just comes off as kind of a crazy person, which is unfortunate. The other two returning characters have smaller roles. The second biggest character, though, is the Secretary of Defense, who returns from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, whose name they don't even say, so I'm not even going to attempt to guess. He is just kind of here to be some kind of, like, ineffectual military lead. He has no power over fighting the Legion, and he's also there to be a skeptic of whether or not they can trust Gamera. And I never liked him in the first movie, and of all the characters that could have returned, it's unfortunate that they had to pick him. He's kind of boring, and he even was in the first movie, and he just kind of seems there to be kind of a stick in the mud. But he's not like an asshole or anything, he's just kind of like, oh, I don't believe that Asagi can communicate with Gamera. We can't trust Gamera as an ally. My favorite returning character, however, is Inspector Osako, who shows up for a brief cameo in the beer bottling plant where the Legion first attack and absorb the glass. He's got a great cameo, and it's not just there to be a cute, funny scene. I mean, it is that way, but it's also there to kind of develop his character. We find out that he quit being a cop because he found out that he was a coward and wasn't cut out for the job and was unprepared to deal with the Gauss, and that it scared him so much that he's decided to go in for a more low-key job, but has a nervous breakdown when the Legion attack because he thinks he's just being chased by monsters, which is a really, really funny idea, and he's fantastic. He brings in energy to the movie that I think it overall lacks. I wish he had a bigger role. But not to worry, he'll have that in the next film. And with that being said, let's get into the monsters, shall we? And let's, of course, start out with Legion. Legion is complicated, and complicated in a good way. They're very, very cool creatures and very, very interesting. They've got a complex, interesting life cycle that's very comparable to something like the Xenomorphs in the Alien franchise, and of course they connect them to bees and ants in the film. Another interesting thing is that insect kaiju are hard to pull off to me. They always come off as generic, in my opinion. It's very hard for me to get excited about insect kaiju. But these are very, very interesting because they're not just straight-up insect kaiju. They're made to look very, very creepy by having that weird human eye in the middle of their head. And then, of course, the Queen Legion looks like nothing I'd ever seen up until this point. And she looks fantastic, with all the sharp edges and the big blue eyes and the energy attack and the mandibles that come out and fire the energy attack. That's all fantastic. I only have two problems with them. My first one comes from the name. I love the name Legion. I love where it comes from. I love the religious illusion that they make. I wish the name wasn't as superficial as it is in the movie, because as it is, they're just called that because there's a lot of them. There's no real connection to that Bible story and what it means, at least as far as I know. I haven't read the Bible story, to be fair. Maybe they injected a lot more religious symbolism in here that I'm just not picking up upon. I do wish that they made it more prevalent in the story because it's a really cool name, and I just wish that they would have done more with it than just having it be a superficial excuse for the name. My other problem is, again, while I really like the life cycle of the Legion, it's very, very convoluted, and there's so many scenes of expository dialogue and so much conjecture by the characters that it's really hard to keep track of. It's so hard to keep track of what exactly the Legion are doing and why. It's so fucking complicated, and I really wish... I'm not saying I wish that it was simpler. I wish that it was explored in a simpler, more interesting way, and not just through people talking. There's a lot going on here with the higher oxygen levels coming out of the spore, the Legion not having blood and being almost entirely made of concentrated oxygen, the fact that they flock to electronics not just to feed on it, but because they're enraged by it, because it shorts out their own communication. That's all very, very interesting. I just wish that it was explained in a more cohesive way, and it wasn't just constant theory, a scene that contradicts the theory, and then further theorizing. I wish that there was more of a streamlined nature to it. But overall, I find the Legion fascinating, and certainly one of my favorite insect-based kaiju. Because again, I'm not a big fan of those, but of those types, I think that the Legion might be one of my favorites. So they're fantastic. Which will, of course, bring us into the big man himself, Gamera. Well, I wish he had more focus in the story, as I talked about earlier. He's kind of reduced back to what he was in the Showa series, of just being there to show up and kill the evil monster. And that's kind of disappointing, because he was given such an interesting characterization in Guardian of the Universe. I wanted to see that continue. But he, as a badass hero, is still fantastic. He's still very fun to watch. I really like his new design. It's pretty similar to the one that we saw in Guardian. They retain the expressive eyes and the overall figure, but they make him look a little sharper, which is cool. And his face is still very, very expressive. So I do really, really like his design. It's a little bit more complicated. My only problem with him design-wise is that I'm not a fan of the wing arm things. For this film introduces the idea that while Gamera is flying, not as the flying saucer, but when he's just using his back legs as jets, that his front arms turn into these wing-like appendages, and that they're like flaps that fold in when he lands. It's an interesting idea, I guess, but I didn't need that, and they just look kind of ridiculous. I think that keeping it what they were in Guardian, where it was just his arms out, that was fine. They didn't have to do the whole wing thing. The biggest thing I took away from this movie characterization-wise for Gamera, and the most interesting thing, but also the only thing that I have to question based on what Guardian set up, was his characterization of being a defender of the Earth and not of humanity, an important distinction. He protects life on Earth, not the people. He's protecting the continued existence of all of Earth's life, not just specifically civilization. And that one day, if we continue to destroy our planet, maybe Gamera will turn against us, seeing us as a threat, which is a really, really interesting idea. And I wish it was explored more than it is in this movie, and that's one of the few interesting ideas that this film introduces that Iris never picks up upon, at least as far as I can recollect. We'll talk about that whenever we watch the movie and review it. They just don't get into it, and it's introduced way too late. It's introduced in the last minute of the movie, and it's never even, introduced at all before that. Gamera is still characterized the same way he was in Guardian, being there to protect our civilization from the evil monsters, from extinction. And that's ultimately my problem with this idea. While it's a cool idea, Gamera was built by the Atlanteans to defend their civilization, and then left for future civilizations to defend them from falling. They never say that Gamera was built to just protect life on Earth and turn on any civilization who might destroyed the planet. Now, maybe Gamera changed his mind. He is a living thing after all, and as we saw in Guardian, has feelings and has some kind of sentience, which is an idea that Iris will continue with. But again, it's an idea that's unexplored, and I just think that Gamera's origins are not brought to the forefront enough, where, again, he just lacks a focus in the story, and I would have loved to see this idea expounded upon so that way it could have made more sense. But all in all, Gamera is still fantastic in this movie. I just wish that he had more focus and that some of the ideas introduced with him were more focused upon. And that'll, of course, bring us into the monster fights and the special effects. The monster fights are pretty good. There are only really two. Gamera's initial confrontation with the pod and with the smaller legions isn't so much a fight as it is just a brief confrontation. But the two fights Gamera has with the Queen Legion are fantastic. They're brutal. Gamera gets really, really cut up. And all the energy attacks are fantastic. There's an amazing moment where Gamera flies past Legion and then comes down and slides across the landscape of the city, firing multiple fireballs and blowing the fuck out of Legion. It's awesome, and then he just stops short and faces Legion and roars. It's an awesome sequence, and probably the most dynamic move in the whole movie. Because while the fights are entertaining, I do think that they lack a sense of energy, like the rest of the movie, ironically. And they're not as dynamic or as unique as the fight was in Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and that's really my only problem with it, is that the fights just feel a little bit too stagnant. But the special effects are very consistent with what we were seeing in Guardian of the Universe. The suitimation is still some of the best I've ever seen, with Gamera's face still being super expressive. That's, of course, harder to pull off with the Legion because they don't really have faces, but the Queen Legion looks fantastic, and the smaller puppetry going on with the small legions is also great. I love the way they're shot, mainly obscured in shadow, and they overall look great. There are a couple awkward moments with them as puppets where they look like puppets, but again, they're shot creatively enough where that isn't that much of a problem. The only real issue the film has with special effects is the CG. There's a lot more CG in this movie than there was in Guardian, and it looks pretty bad. Whenever the smaller legions are flying, or whenever the Queen Legion is flying, they're CGI. And they don't look terrible, but when the smaller legions first go on Gamera, they have to use CGI to show them moving, and it looks awful. And it looks like something that you would see in a video game. It looks terrible. And there are other sequences with that throughout the movie. Again, mainly when the smaller legions are flying. Like, there's a scene where they fire some missiles up at them, and it just looks terrible. But the practical effects are all great, as they were last time, and the CG isn't so bad that it ruins the overall movie. In regards to the soundtrack by Kawatone, it's, of course, the dude's a master. He never puts in a bad soundtrack, he never puts in a bad score, and it's just as mythic and entertaining and unique as Gamera Guardian of the Universe's was, and just as much fun to listen to. My only problem is that it doesn't fit the tone quite as well. There are a couple of really beautiful score moments where, mainly whenever there's some kind of light show going on up in the sky, like when there's all that green energy moving towards the pod, and when Gamera is sucking in all of the orange energy from the sky, both to reawaken himself and to power up his super fire attack. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention earlier. I should have mentioned that when I was talking about Gamera. Gamera gets a new finishing move in this movie with the, as I'm going to call it, Super Omega Fire Attack, which is a really, really great visual, and it looks fantastic. He sucks in all this energy from the surrounding area, opens up his chest, and fires out this huge fireball that completely decimates the Queen Legion. It's awesome looking. And I love how it looks like it's taking a lot out of him energy-wise. His eyes roll back into his head, and he twitches as he fires it out. It looks painful, and it looks like a true finishing move. It looks fantastic. But just to get back to the score, while I think it works great for the most part, it just doesn't fit the tone of this movie as well as it fit Guardian of the Universe, because this film isn't quite as mythic or as fantastic as Guardian of the Universe was. It's a little bit more down-to-earth, and it's more of a science fiction story, and that mythic kind of fantasy-type music doesn't fit as well with that. But the military's march is fantastic, and the opening credits theme is great, so it's still great, it just doesn't fit the tone of the movie as well. Overall, Gamera 2 Advent of Legion is a decent follow-up to Gamera Guardian of the Universe. It's a fun, interesting alien invasion story with some decent continuations from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and some decent ideas in terms of continuing this version of Gamera. But overall, it's a bit flat, it drags a lot, and it's just not as fresh of a take on a giant monster movie as Guardian of the Universe was. And it has somewhat of a flat, lack of energy overall feel. It just struggles to get its audience excited because its characters don't feel exciting. And it doesn't have enough going on in its story. But overall, it's still entertaining and still definitely worth watching. And overall, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. That may sound low to some of you guys, but it's just, it drags a lot, and I just really don't like those characters, and I just wish that it just had more to offer as both a sequel to Guardian of the Universe and just as a monster movie overall. But again, it is not by any stretch of the imagination a bad movie. It's still really entertaining and still really well made. So I still highly recommend you check it out. And it will be used as the launching off point for a great movie. See, it's strange. I feel like Shizuke Kaneko already knew where he wanted to take this Gamera trilogy, but he wanted to build up to a third installment. He wanted it to be a trilogy, so he needed a second movie in between the first and the third that would fill in the gap between the first and the third movie, so he could have the beginning and the excellent conclusion, and introduce some other ideas. You see, a lot of the things that... See, a lot of ideas from Legion will be used in the next film, and used very well. And they'll actually connect a lot of what happens in Legion to Guardian of the Universe, whereas in the movie itself, they feel kind of disconnected. And the next film will make really good use of that. But we'll talk about that tomorrow when we get into the conclusion to Shizuke Kaneko's Heisei Gamera trilogy, when we talk about 1999's Gamera 3, Revenge of Iris. I hope you guys will join me for that review. Sayonara, kids.